The first topic that we've chose for the Service Provider CD is the topic of rescheduling. As we've analyzed numbers of salons, great hairdressers, new service providers to the industry, we noticed that rescheduling can make a salon or break it. It can make a new hairdresser or nail technician or spa technician or break them. And it can even create hopelessness in the minds of the service provider because they don't envision themselves ever becoming able to reschedule a client properly.
Now, don't anybody out there get hopeless. That's what this CD is all about.
Hope.
Like to share some stories with you and maybe some things you're thinking about right now. I've noticed over the years that there's two types of service providers. There are the seasoned veterans that have already gotten over this need to reschedule. They reschedule naturally. Their guests will usually reschedule 2 and 3, if not 6 months worth of appointments ahead of time because they know that time is at a premium and they want to be sure that their service provider is available for them when they are needed. So the other type is the young stylist or can be very, very busy stylist. Terry's going to give you an example of a salon that we consulted with and the hairdressers in that salon, and their story is very, very compelling. You can get to the point where if you're in a busy salon that creates a great deal of traffic, you can just count on that traffic, knowing that your time will fill in and you'll be busy no matter what. But in reality, if our number one goal as a service provider is to create a repeat guest, we need to take those clients, the salon clients that come in and the request clients that come in for us, and we believe that servicing them properly is seeing them as they're needed to be seen. Industry statistics prove that if a guest reschedules today, they'll reschedule in approximately 5 weeks. If they don't reschedule today, they'll return in a little bit over 13 weeks.
Statistics also prove in the industry that if a guest doesn't reschedule, when they do schedule their next appointment, it is long after they needed to be seen, in the example you just indicated, but also they'll schedule for the minimum service that they really needed.
Because they're just happy to get in at any time.
Well, they'll take anything available.
Now, for those of you that are new who are sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, my whole schedule is wide open. People could call and get in for haircut, color, you name it. I've got all the time in the world. That's a mentality that won't serve you going forward because you plan today for the busy hairdresser that you're going to be. You actually train your guests how to be guests with you in that salon.
That's terrific. Another great thing to put into your dialogue bank is the word availability, even the front desk staff. I teach a class called First Impression, which is all about how to create urgency in the customer's eyes. The guest needs to hear, let me check on Mary's availability. Availability creates urgency. It says time is premium, as Steve indicated, and also time is limited, so I better respond.
Another key point, Terry, as I listen to you talk about that is that we need to establish what prime time is in the business. Whatever your work schedule is, I'm sure that you have prime time, the time that most guests want to be serviced, and then non-prime, those are the time slots that fill in the slowest or don't fill in at all. Part of the power in rescheduling is that you can have the option to put guests in your non-prime time.
And protect prime time.
Protect prime for those people who absolutely have to have it.
Yes.
And knowing that prime will always fill in where non-prime doesn't.
For those of you that aren't familiar with the expression prime time, I was in the restaurant industry for a number of years, and the dinner hour had a prime time band. Prime time was about 5:45 until about 8:45 or 9 o'clock. We knew that those would be the first requested times. We also knew that we would have walk-ins off the street wanting to dine without a reservation. We knew that that would be the heaviest load of time, and we had to be able to understand, since the restaurant was open from dinner from 4:30 until 10 o'clock or 10:30, how did we create volume and traffic during those non-prime times? That had to take place with our dialogue. The word availability helped with that, created an urgency, and saying, do you have any plans for the night because we can get you in and out during this time frame? But we had to know that prime time couldn't be the only thing that would allow the restaurant to be successful. Non-prime time traffic helped a great deal with the profitability and the bottom line of the restaurant. We couldn't survive on prime time traffic only. I want to talk about an example of a salon that we were in, a wonderful salon, very high volume, great established legacy employees on staff as well as new talent. We were in front of them just talking about the topic of rescheduling. We had on the spot the manager print the numbers of the staff. What were their yearly sales? How often are their guests returning? We had hairdressers that were going to do in excess of $150,000 behind the chair this year. And their average customer was being seen only 4 times a year. What that means is the average customer was coming in what? Every 11 weeks? Isn't that right?
13 weeks.
Every 13 weeks. That's awful. One of the young ladies raised her hand in the front, a very successful stylist on staff, and said, I have never thought about that being my responsibility to my career or the salon as a whole. I knew because we are very successful that the salon would create traffic for me. So the thought of having to reschedule, I never even took part in. Never had the conversation with customers. My salon filled my chair, and I allowed him to do it. And she was ashamed of thinking that way. But no one had ever talked to her about the responsibility of rescheduling.
It was quite an eye-opening experience to talk to all of the hairdressers there and realize that
Sure was.
that was the norm. That wasn't the exception. You had great producing hairdressers that were only seeing their guests every 4 to 5 times per year, when what they really needed to see people was in approximately 5 weeks.
Or 10 times a year.
Or 10 times a year.
Right.
So what that meant was, and what it should mean to you listening, is that if you're not rescheduling, you need 2 to 3 times the number of guests to be busy.
Yes.
That someone who reschedules does. That should mean something significant to you. What it also means is that most of you are already touching enough guests that if you service them perfectly, and if they enjoyed the menu, and if you rescheduled, and if you provided and enticed them into take-home products, that you would in fact already have the income that you desire.
We've shown on paper the influence of scheduling a guest every 5 weeks, or a guest scheduling every 8 weeks, or a guest being scheduled every 10 weeks. And it's amazing how much money is left on the table. The guest wants to be seen that often. I can give you my own testimony. I am a color customer, not by choice. I love having hair color, but I have to have it every 3 weeks because I'm of the age now where my age shows at the base of my hair, right? Is that a good way to say that?
Yes.
Great. So therefore, I have to have color every 3 weeks. So therefore, if I'm not rescheduling and I need to have my service provider see me every 3 weeks and I don't reschedule, what are the odds that she's going to be there when I need her every time? Probably very slim.
Okay, to take this a little bit farther, some of the ways that we've seen when coaching individual stylists is that we can look at a stylist's dollar per guest and see the influence of whether they're really delivering an extraordinary service to the customer. Another area that we look at is by looking at the guest per man-hour ratio. Many times we'll see someone that's not rescheduling that's seeing about 0.4 guests per man-hour, which basically means that only, about 25 minutes of every hour they're with a guest. In most of these cases, people already have enough guests to be fully scheduled, but they're letting the busy bus come and go. Again, by not rescheduling a guest, you're leaving people to schedule it as they can. You're allowing them to decide when it fits time-wise and financially into their life instead of when they really need to be serviced. See, we believe that everybody deserves to have the added confidence that comes from looking and feeling their best every day.
There's an expression that we use at PSC. Today's performance is tomorrow's traffic. We know that holds true for the salon as well. If the customer, your guest, average service dollar is the price of a haircut only, it usually means that you haven't figured out or have the disciplines to reschedule your guest. It's so important for the customer, if they're going to be loyal to you as their service provider, to have you be there when they need you. And the only way you have assurance that that's going to happen is if you're rescheduling them.
In reality, this comes down to an issue of discipline and dialogue, really.
Yes.
It's us coming together as professionals and realizing that it would be better for you to have a stable income that was steady and rising versus an income that shot up during peak times of the year and then tailed off to almost nothing or got very slower after that.
I don't understand why that happens still.
Well, contrary to common belief, hair does grow the same amount every month.
Right.
So there really never should be a busier time than another.
That's why it doesn't make sense. Unless they only want to look good during those holidays of the year. I don't find that to be true. Women are purchasing makeup on a daily basis.
One of the key points of rescheduling really is that we believe that a trip to the salon comes out of discretionary income for the guests, for your guests. And when they're in front of you, when they've just had a great salon experience, and you offer to reschedule them, we believe that's when the money is spent. If you let that guest leave, now they're comparing or they're using the money that they would have spent with you to always have the added confidence that comes from looking and feeling their best. They're deciding, do I want that black bag? Do I want a great pair of black flats? Do I want an evening out with my husband or wife? Do I want that weekend in the city? And sometimes we lose in those equations. Sometimes a great pair of black flats is more important to a guest than coming back to see you in 5 weeks when they need to. But you're not competing with that if they reschedule today. That's what's so important. Our rule of thumb is when and if the economy ever gets tight and you start hearing people talk about the economy being tight, it's a critical time to reschedule. We should always, always, always be rescheduling. It's part of creating a repeat guest, which is your number one job.
Absolutely. If you and I owned a salon, how long would we give someone to build their chair or their station or their cabin?
You and I have differing opinions on this. I know you would say 6 months, and I would say a year. But what we're both coming to kind of agree with is that more than likely we'd have a number of guests. We probably wouldn't put more than 200 new guests in your chair. What do you think about that, Terry?
I think that's fair. It would either be either or. It would be a time frame because we need
or
help.
Or 200, whichever comes first.
Whichever comes first, yes.
That's fair. That works for us.
But why is that important? Because we've witnessed on occasion where multiple hundreds of customers have been put into a service provider's chair, and that service provider can't keep a customer. So what's happening is we're just trying to make them busy, but there's more of a problem there than meets the eye.
So that's where this responsibility of you as a stylist really comes in. It's your responsibility to reschedule your guests. It's your responsibility to create a repeat guest. It's your responsibility to recommend take-home and recommend and upsell the menu so that people enjoy more of the salon than they are right now.
Let's do numbers without saying names. The most successful independent hairdressers' numbers that we've been involved with intimately.
Well, the first one that comes to mind is a young lady that had less than, I believe she had around 260 guests, worked with an assistant, and did upwards of $350,000 a year with only 260 guests. That's why we get so excited about this business, and that's why we get so excited about people's potential. There are sometimes people, there's hairdressers that we sat in front of who are doing $60,000 a year and think they've maxed out. You see, that's what happens when you're not rescheduling, and you have to have a book full of people that will reschedule on their own, that'll try and get squeezed in, that'll call you. If you need 4 times the customer base because you're not rescheduling, you're also not upselling the menu, therefore you're doing haircut onlys. And we've actually witnessed times where individual stylists burn out because they think, oh my God, the only way I can make more money is to work more hours.
Because I need more guests.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's not it. Most all of you, unless you're just starting out, have enough guests. What we need to do is help them enjoy their salon experience at a higher level.
That's exactly right.
We said earlier that rescheduling is about discipline and dialogue. Let's take discipline first. I believe that when you believe in your heart that your guests should reschedule, they will. It's a matter of making a commitment that you're going to talk with every single guest, every time about rescheduling. Not some of the time, not just on good hair days, not just on that perfect guest that everything went right for, but every single guest.
Not just on your favorites either.
Right. Part of what I love about the commitment to reschedule every guest is it sets the expectation higher. It kind of puts pressure on you to deliver an extraordinary salon experience while the guest is in your chair. All right, let's move from discipline to dialogue. Having the right dialogue in order to reschedule the guest and knowing when to use it is a critical part of this. Once you're on board with being convinced that it's necessary that you talk to every guest every time about rescheduling, then we have to plan in advance what we're going to say and know the times during the guest service that we can bring that up. We believe that you need to be willing to be uncomfortable and awkward with your words, much in the same way that you were with your hands at one time. If you think back to the first time you wrapped a perm, or the first time that you did a foil highlight, everything didn't quite fit. Didn't know where to put the comb, didn't know where to put the foil or where to put the papers. Didn't know if you had enough hands to make everything happen. Felt very awkward. But look at over time and repetition in doing it, how easily and how much second nature that is to you now. Using dialogue is much the same way. We find that using the proper dialogue and rehearsing in advance really brings about a calm and a better approach to servicing a guest. Let's talk about when we believe that you should bring up rescheduling. We think it starts shortly after you welcome the guest to the salon and shake their hand. As you're walking back to your chair for the image profile or consultation, we think that just saying something, for example, have you ever tried to schedule an appointment with me and your first choice not been available? Now there's 2 different things that a guest can say to that question. They're either going to say, no, I've always been able to get in at my first choice. Or they're going to say, yes, as a matter of fact, I needed to be here 2 weeks ago, but your schedule was full. Let's look at both of those options. If they say, no, I've always been able to get in, then you look back at them and simply say, many of my guests have been experiencing difficulty getting in with me. I want to make sure that I'm always here when you need me, so today before you leave, we'll set aside time for your next visit.
Now, this responsibility doesn't always have to just be the hairdressers. It's the entire team's responsibility to reschedule this guest. Even upon check-in, the same dialogue Steve just used with hairdresser to guest can be used with front desk staff and guest upon check-in.
Now again, the obvious answer if the guest says yes, they have had difficulty getting in with you, is to apologize and say, I'm very sorry. Many of my guests have been experiencing the same difficulty, and I feel like I've let you down. I'll make sure today before you leave that we set aside time for your next visit.
But what is some of the normal dialogue we hear? When we hear the guest bring the conversation up first. Wow, I have been trying to get here for a couple weeks. I know,
I sure have been busy.
Wow, I'm busy now.
We always say in situations like that, you got a choice to either feed your ego or feed your family. And feeding your ego is a lot of times the comments we hear, yeah, you know, I've waited so long to be busy, and it's so wonderful to finally be scheduled like Mary. But feeding your family is taking that guest, hearing what they're really saying. They don't want it to be difficult to get in with you. They want it to be easy to get in with you. They want to be there when they need to be there.
Something that goes along with what Steve is saying, especially for service providers, people who are providing service, people who are dealing with people all day long, is listen to understand and speak to be understood. When Steve is making reference to the customer walking back to the chair with the hairdresser, they're giving indicators on what they like and do not like, or what they need improved upon in their relationship with you. So listen to understand so you can correct the problem and make sure they're comfortable in the future.
Okay, so once you've put the question out there and addressed their response, now you just go on with their visit. You'll take them to the chair, go through the image profile. As you're wrapping up the image profile or the consultation, and you're talking about length, shape, texture of their hair that you've agreed upon, at the very last thing before you go back into the wash house or the lather lounge is you're going to say, based on what we've talked about today and the length and shape that your hair will be, I'll need to see you again in 5 weeks. We can take care of that before you leave today.
Terrific.
And you leave that alone. That's the end of the conversation. You move on to the next phase of the service. You would again bring it up during the haircut or the service itself, just to recap and revisit that conversation. You'll remember in the image profile we talked about the shape that we're working with today and the length of your hair and the fact that I'll need to see you again in 5 weeks.
And I need to remind you that this shape will start to lose its shape in 5 weeks.
Certainly. Now, the moment of truth is drawing near. It's that moment that happens up in the front of the salon where you're on the guest's side of the big appointment desk, and you're taking care of the final business that will lead to your lasting impression with that guest until their next visit. It's where you take care of important things like asking them for referrals. It's where you take care of the take-home recommendations that you've made and make sure that they have products to maintain their look. It's also where you revisit this conversation and try and absolutely reschedule them for their next visit.
Most people start to lose their confidence and they become less of a service provider or less as an expert right now. The voice changes, the body language changes of the service provider, because at this point they think they may get a rejection. So they pull back in this relationship that was working so beautifully, and now they pull back because they think they might get a no. Do not do these things that we're talking about to be in compliance because the salon says you must say these things. Do these things and start to embrace them because it's best for your guest. And if you believe in lifelong relationships, you do this and you risk being uncomfortable with your words and even a rejection because you're doing the right thing by nudging them for their next service. Voice inflection is huge during this. For example, we hear a lot of people ask the question without specifics, just generically, something to the tune of, "Would you like to reschedule?" Sounds very weak, sounds like I don't mean it, sounds like you should say no to me. Think about how you say it. "Mary, as I indicated earlier during our service, I need to see you again in 5 weeks." The voice never trails up. In fact, it stays with a very confident tone because she knows I'm her service provider, I'm her expert. It is my professional recommendation that she be seen again in 5 weeks. And I have to show her that I mean it.
Again, this is a moment of truth. We talked about JP's quote earlier in the day, and that successful people do all the things that unsuccessful people aren't willing to do. Sometimes in the name of service, a stylist or service provider will drop their guest at the front desk and dash on to the next guest that's waiting in the waiting area in the name of good service.
Drop and ditch.
But any time that you drop that guest off, you're not taking care of them completely.
Correct.
This is a great opportunity to finish servicing them and ensure that they've had a great salon experience. Part of that is setting aside time for their next visit. Your dialogue will determine that. If you are hearing about Johnny's soccer schedule and Mommy's travel schedule and the carpool schedule, you probably aren't using proper dialogue to attain their next visit.
I just recently had LASIK eye surgery, and after the surgery, or even prior to the surgery itself, during the consultation, they said your surgery will be one day, and then you'll have follow-up appointments that are mandatory for you. 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, and 1 year after surgery. Can you adhere to that? They didn't say, do you want to be back in a month? They just said, it's necessary. And when you're in good hands and people are truly acting like the experts in their field, of course you'd agree to that.
Okay, so the dialogue that's important, just as Terry said, eye contact, voice inflection,
Body language.
body position, body language, where you're at compared to where they're at, that they feel as though they're in good hands is critically important. But it's also time. You are there about business. You are there about their salon experience and what you can do for them. Be the professional. So if it is your personality style where you just say, based on what we've done today, I need to see you again in 5 weeks, let's let Mary set that up for you. What works best, early in the day or late in the day? Are Thursdays always appropriate for you, or do you need to be in earlier in the week?
And then remember the non-prime time that we talked about earlier.
So that'll be a function of the front desk staff and the concierge relating to and helping to facilitate the rescheduling. However, it's your job to initiate that and your job to make sure that it takes place. Sometimes the guest will say to us, I can't reschedule today. I don't even know where I'll be in 5 weeks. That's also a moment of truth. You can either say, well, okay, bye-bye, just call when you need to get in and we'll figure it out somehow. Or you can be the professional. The dialogue that we suggest is to look the customer directly in the eye and to say to them, it sounds like you've got a schedule that requires a great deal of you, so that I'm sure I'm here when you need me, and you always have the added confidence that comes from looking and feeling your best. I'd like to set aside time today for your next visit. Should something come up or should your schedule require you to be out of town, it's always easier to move you on my schedule than it is to try and squeeze you in. That's fair enough, isn't it? You see, many times, dialogue like that is just a matter of, I always look at it as kind of the customer or the guest putting their finger right in the middle of your chest and saying, do you mean it? Do you really mean it that I should reschedule today? Because if you're just messing with me, I'll call like I always do. But if you think it's important, I'll set aside time. Think about it. Most business professionals, just like you, work by appointment. So appointments aren't a foreign thing to a guest walking into your salon. It's just foreign that they do it with the service provider in our industry. So we've got to break down that barrier a little bit and train them how to be a guest in our salon. And if you'll do that, I think that you can really win with your
And
guests.
the young lady that we talked about earlier that did that 350,000 plus, rescheduling was a key to her success.
Oh yeah, it was a must all the way around. It wasn't even an option.
Could we cover squeeze-ins now?
Sure. Our biggest feeling on squeeze-ins is that a squeeze-in guest is a temporary guest. We tell hairdressers all the time, please don't buy a new home, buy a new car, or alter your standard of living if you're relying on income that comes from squeeze-in guests. You will lose them as a guest.
You'll disappoint them.
It's only a matter of time. They're not with you forever. Sooner or later, they're going to call and need to get in that day, and you won't be able to accommodate them.
Mm-hmm.
The first time you can't accommodate them, they don't go to someone else in the salon. They go to a whole different salon because you've let them down. You trained them how to be a guest in your salon. That training was that they got squeezed in. When all of a sudden you don't squeeze them in because you can't, you physically can't, they get mad and go somewhere else. Please save a squeeze-in appointment for the times in people's lives when you really need to do that. There are legitimate times for a squeeze-in. Certainly a death in the family is always a legitimate time for a squeeze-in. They didn't plan it. You couldn't have planned it.
If you and I owned a salon, they'd be called an S.O.S. appointment, not a squeeze-in.
True.
It's gotten too casual. and it's sloppy. It's not good service.
So please, I hope that you will take note of how we feel about squeeze-ins. Talk to the people that have been maybe behind the chair longer, that have lost guests as a result of squeezing in or not being able to squeeze someone in. It's really, really important that you meet this challenge early in your career.
You know what also would be something I would do is I'd also probably have a service line item called S.O.S. So if I had to look at someone's service history and see how often they only call in, most people don't know. They've got a gut feeling that Mary called in 8 times and we had to squeeze her in, or John called in 3 times, but really what happens if it was more and we're being taken advantage of?
It's a great idea. Another thing that comes up sometimes with rescheduled guests is that we get this feeling that since they set the appointment up in advance, there's going to be a higher percentage of no-shows. And something that we really believe in is that the front desk will take care of a reminder call for any pre-scheduled appointments, usually 48 hours in advance of that appointment to remind them. However, one of the greatest things you could do for your salon owner is to reschedule a guest. Every guest that leaves the salon today without rescheduling is at least one random phone call that your owner can't schedule front desk staff to handle. It's much easier to schedule reminder calls in downtime or non-busy time in the salon than it is to schedule for random phone calls. So if we're really operating as a team in the salon environment, that front desk staff and your owner needs you to reschedule today while the guest is in the salon, and then they can properly schedule your front desk staff accordingly.
Mm-hmm. All right, now it's time for the role play.
Great.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to be a customer. I'll be a customer twice. Once we'll do it one way, once we'll do another. You'll be my service provider in both examples.
Okay.
Okay, so are you ready to begin?
Yes.
Terrific.
I've already welcomed you, Terry, in the front of the salon, and now we're walking back.
Okay.
What I would say to you is, Terry, have you ever tried to schedule an appointment with me and your first choice not been available?
Oh my gosh, this has been awful this time. Look at my hair. I needed to be in here 3 weeks ago.
Wow, I am so sorry. It's my responsibility to make sure that you always have the added confidence that comes from looking and feeling your best. I'm going to make sure today that we take care of that and set aside time for your next appointment.
Okay. Make sure I do that.
Great. The conversation would stop at that point. I don't have to carry it any further. Now you're in my chair. We've just completed your image profile. And what I would say to you is, Terry, I'm really excited about what we're going to do with your hair today. As part of your responsibility for this new look, I'm going to need to see you again in approximately 5 weeks.
Oh, so that's different than the 8 weeks before.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The fact that we're working with highlights in your hair and a little bit shorter length, which requires a more frequent visit here to the salon, we have to make sure we set aside time for your next visit.
Okay.
Great. Let's go back and get your service started.
All right.
Again, we stop. It's a sentence here and a response. That's really all it is. But it's preparing in advance, because I could have just as easily missed either of those 2 opportunities. So now...
By just doing what you do.
Yeah, just by zoning out, just by being friendly, just by talking about maybe your schedule and the time of the year and what's going on, instead of being the beauty professional. So now, the next time you've gone through, you've gotten your highlights, you've gotten your haircut, and I'm just kind of tweaking your haircut a little bit before I finish your hair. It's at that point, I would say, Terry, you may remember when we talked earlier that based on the service we've provided for you today and your current length of your hair, I'm going to need to see you again in 5 weeks. Please be sure that we remember to set time aside before you leave today.
Okay.
Again, we're finished. And again, I don't mean for this to sound easier than what it is. But it is that easy. If you'll be disciplined, I've already now made 3 specific requests of Terry to reschedule before she leaves today, where I've committed to her and she said okay to me. I could still lose this if I don't follow up. There's a next step. The next step is what happens at the front desk. Now remember, we're going to be standing at the front desk. I'm going to be right next to Terry. Good eye contact, good voice inflection. It's my time to be the professional. So imagine that we're standing up at the front desk. Terry, since you came in, all of us here at our salon have done everything to exceed your expectations. You may remember we talked about scheduling your next visit, and I remember that I've let you down in the past with that by not making sure we set aside time today. I'd like you to set aside time for 5 weeks from now for your follow-up service.
Great.
Works great for you?
Yes, it does.
Does early in the week or late in the week work best for you?
Probably early in the week.
Terrific. Does early in the day or late in the day work for you?
Late in the day.
Now, Mary is our concierge here at our salon, and she is absolutely fantastic at working with my schedule. So, Mary, what Terry's asked for is earlier in the week and late in the day. If you could make sure that I see Terry within that time frame 5 weeks from now, I'd be delighted.
And if I was a receptionist, Mary, at that point I'd say, Steve, what services will you be performing?
Mary, the services that I'll be performing on Terry is highlight service as well as a haircut. I'll need approximately an hour and a half worth of time. And again, remember, we're talking early in the week and late in the day. At this point, what Mary would do is offer Terry an alternate of choice in options. So, for example, how it would sound is, and I do lots of great voices like Power Rangers and people like that for my little nephew, but I haven't really got a good Mary voice. So Mary's going to sound like Steve. So what Mary would say to Terry is, Terry, we have a Tuesday appointment on the 14th at 4:30 in the afternoon, or we have Wednesday the 15th. Which works best for you?
The 7:30.
That'd be terrific.
Thank you.
I've got you 7:30 on the 15th with
Great.
Steve. Okay, are we ready to go to example 2?
Yes.
All right. Okay, once again, I've greeted Terry up in the reception area of the salon, and we're walking back for the image profile. Terry, have you ever tried to schedule an appointment with me and your first choice not been available?
Steve, what's going on with that front desk? I've been trying to get in here for weeks, and I feel like they're just not organized. What's the problem?
Well, Terry, I'm really grateful that you brought that to my attention. What I want to tell you is that while you may be thinking it's the front desk, really it's my fault, and I apologize. I've let you down as your service provider. It's my job to make sure that you want for nothing as a guest here in our salon. So I want to make sure that I get involved today, and based on the length and shape of your hair, we'll set aside time for your next appointment. Does that work for you?
Thank you. Yeah, it does. Okay, side note. How many times have we heard when a salon is displeased with anything that has to do with the hairdresser that the blame goes on the front desk staff?
Happens all the time.
All the time.
Or someone who's not present. Anybody but the one that's listening to it.
Well, you're about to cut my hair. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to make you upset. So it's utterly unfair that blame takes place in the salon. Because any time mud is slung,
You're losing ground.
you're losing ground.
Okay, so now we're going to fast forward. I've completed consultation with Terry. And actually on this visit, I've convinced Terry that she no longer should color her hair at home. She's going to trust me for the first time with her all-over color. Terry, based on what we're doing today, and I'm so grateful that we're finally going to be able to do salon color on your hair. I'll take that as the greatest compliment. Based on that, I'm going to need to see you a little bit more frequently. Probably,
What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a responsibility for keeping your color fresh and making sure that the regrowth area isn't a nuisance to you.
Ooh.
That usually the frequency is 3 to 4 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
Just out of curiosity, how often were you coloring your hair at home?
Just when I absolutely had to and couldn't stand it anymore.
So this is probably going to feel like it's a little bit more frequent just because you were probably putting color on your hair when you had time. Now you're going to be planning for it. But what's great is that you no longer have to feel that pressure because your well-being is going to be clearly in my hands. Is that fair enough?
Does everyone understand why I married this man?
Okay, so based on that, I'm going to need to see you for color every 3 to 4 weeks. And if we can extend that out, we will. But being that this is the first time I'm going to be applying color, We will actually be watching that together.
Okay.
I want to make sure that before you leave today, we've got your next appointment scheduled. Is that fair enough?
I'm a little worried about the time commitment, but I'll do my best.
Great. We'll work together on that.
Okay.
We're going to fast forward to just before I begin blow drying Terry's hair.
How's the color?
Spectacular. Wait till you see this after it's blown dry. You're going to be so pleased with the choice that you made today. Now, Terry, based on what we did today, you may recall that we're going to need to set up a color appointment. What I'm looking at probably, let's do the first one at 3 weeks. And then we'll look and see how this works out.
You think it could ever go to 4?
Well, it may. We're in this together. So
How often do you get color?
about every 3 to 4 weeks.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, I wouldn't have guessed that. It always just looks so natural.
Thank you. So remind me as we get to the front desk that we make sure to set aside time. Is that fair enough?
Yes, it is.
Great. Now, we're back up at the front desk. Again, all the things we've set up until now about where you are and the business that you need to transact. I'm going to once again say to Terry, based on what we did today, Terry, I need you to set up with Mary, the receptionist, your next appointment for 3 weeks from now.
Okay.
What works best for you, earlier in the week or late in the week?
Late in the week, please. Saturdays, if
Saturdays
possible.
if possible, early in the day or late in the day?
Doesn't matter.
Terrific. So Mary, late in the week, but preferably Saturday, and any time will work for her. What do you have 3 weeks from now? What I'm going to need, Mary, is approximately an hour and a half with Terry. Great. Terry, we've got you down for Saturday the 20th at 10 o'clock.
Great.
Terrific. I'll see you then.
Will you give me a reminder call?
Absolutely. 48 hours before.
Okay. Thank you.
And would you like that call at your home number or on your mobile?
Home, please.
Terrific. Okay, we've thrown a lot at you in a short amount of time.
And this is good for spa technicians, nail technicians, hairdressers. Even though our dialogue was geared towards the hair service, this applies to every single person in the salon.
Absolutely. The choice now is yours in what you do with it, how you use it, how much practice, how much thought in advance that you give to it. But we've asked you to have the discipline to talk about it with every guest, every single visit.
I think the key that I think about as a service provider is, do I want to have to make 600 people happy 4 times a year, or 250 people happy 8 times or 10 times a year? Be a perfectionist or someone who's working towards becoming something in my career, it'd be a whole lot easier to do it with fewer people.
Oh, absolutely. So we wish you nothing but the best. Again, what we've shared with you are ideas that we absolutely know have been tried and tested. They're the truth, and they'll work for you, provided that you practice and work with it.
Say again, they need to be willing to be...
You need to be willing to be awkward with your words in the same way that you were awkward with your hands at one time as a professional.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much for trusting us with your minds for this hour.
Remember, it matters, and your success matters to us.